Welcome everybody to the inaugural Heavy Lifting with Theo the Juggernaut. That is right, I'm Theo the Juggernaut, and we have a wonderful show for you this fine Monday morning, the beginning of the week. The last couple of weeks left in the NHL season. We're going to focus mostly on the NHL. With me this morning is Anthony Jacob. If you haven't followed this guy on Instagram, that's because it's not by his name, but it's NHL.Discussion. Good morning, Anthony. Thank you for joining us. How is Monday starting for you so far?
It's really well. It's good to chat with you about some hockey, Theo.
Absolutely. And like you said, you've got a background in hockey here in Winnipeg. We won't touch into that more so, only because what you do on your Instagram page is quite fascinating. And I love it because you touch every single storyline on and off the ice. Now, I have to ask you, what was the brainchild behind starting this Instagram page for you?
Honestly, just as a kid, I've always been super interested in watching hockey, and I just loved hockey, and I just wanted a way to kind of talk with the hockey community. And I thought just starting an Instagram page, maybe I'd be able to talk with a few fans. All of a sudden, it turned into this pretty huge thing where we're posting news, highlights, analysis all the time, and it's a lot of fun.
Absolutely. You say a few friends. I must say that you've just told me it's 215,000 followers, and it's quite substantial only because, I mean, you got stories from every walks of life, whether it be, the Carolina Hurricanes and their wonderful antics after a win. The duck hunt was my personal favorite. It actually brought me back to my good old days in Nintendo. And anything to what Don Cherry said about it, to contract signings from players the Marlies are signing, or entry-level contracts with our Jets. I mean, you touch everything and anything. I have to ask you, do you like being called the know-it-all? I mean, you know everything about NHL. I mean, do you like that? Do you like being that guru, so to speak?
Yeah, I think it's pretty cool. That's kind of what I've always kind of liked, or what I always wanted to kind of be as a kid. To have a lot of knowledge on hockey, and I know it's a lot of fun, and I try to put a variety of different things, some things for the average fan, just some highlights and stuff, but then a couple more stats and stuff for kind of the more advanced fan, for someone who wants a bit more. So we try to put a bit of everything, and yeah, it's a lot of fun.
So how long, Anthony, have you been doing this, and how much time do you spend on it roughly per day, or is it just something you do as more like a hobby and an effort kind of thing?
Yeah, I started in 2015, so coming on almost 4 years now. So I spent a lot of time and effort on it, but it's definitely rewarding, and it's a lot of fun to do.
Okay, so let's talk about your favorite team.
Well, I have to go with both Toronto and Winnipeg. Obviously, when I was first growing up, Winnipeg wasn't here yet, so I kind of had to go along with Toronto, and they sucked at first, but now all of a sudden they're getting better, the Jets are getting better, and so now all of a sudden I have two good teams to cheer for.
Absolutely, especially in the last 3 years when they went 1-for-2 in the draft.
Yeah, that was a tough year to watch, but now all of a sudden they both have superstars. So.
Do you like how each team has kind of progressed in the last 3 years?
Oh yeah, definitely both teams. I mean, all of a sudden from being dumpster fires almost to being like the class of the NHL now. It's pretty amazing.
So starting from top to bottom, I mean, you've got two great coaches for both teams. We're going to kind of compare the Leafs and the Jets here for a couple of minutes, only because, I mean, I was a huge Red Wings fan growing up, and Mike Babcock and Scotty Bowman were the coaches there for Detroit. Just aged myself a bit. But, I mean, having Babs behind the bench for the Leafs, do you think that's good for this young squad? And do you think they're going to be able to make a bit of a push in the playoffs without that defensive core that the Jets picked up at during the trade deadline?
Yeah, that's a real interesting question, because Babcock's obviously the highest paid coach right now, but there's been a lot of anger from Leafs fans. Just he relies on veterans a lot. And he's not necessarily a player's coach. Like he's really tough on the players, and you just wonder if that defense is not a great defense. Morgan Riley's great, but the rest of the defense, they really struggle. and the team really hasn't meshed well together lately. But you look at the high-end talent they added, John Tavares last year, Austin Matthews, Mitch Marner. They're a really good team. It's just that defense, I'm not sure if it's going to be able to hold up in the playoffs against Boston again.
Absolutely. Like you said, John Tavares leading the team with 41. Marner with 62 assists. Marner's leading the team with 87 points, and we're not even talking about Austin Matthews yet. You've got that firepower and that philosophy in Toronto basically saying if they score 4 goals, we got to score 5. And for the most part, outside of the last 5 games with Freddie Anderson, they've been doing so. Freddie Anderson, a bit of a skid, less than a 800% saving there. Do you think he's kind of getting the bad games out of his cycle so that he gets the good games come playoff time? And I mean, I hope for the Leafs to go well in the East, but like you said, they got to go through Beantown, and that might be a bit of an issue. It's kind of like their nemesis, so to speak, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, no kidding. Like the last 2 times they've been in the playoffs, it's been a third period collapse in Game 7 against Boston. But on Freddie Anderson, he's been steady Freddie all year long until the last couple games. He was battling a couple injuries, so I mean you got to hope that that's not the issue, but. He's been really good all year, and hopefully he can finally bring that into the playoffs.
All right, so let's touch base on our Winnipeg Jets here real quick. Wheeler should surpass his 91 points from last year. He's hitting on 88 right now. Shuffles is doing well with 80. Patrick Laine, I mean, he's jumped into that first line on that third spot. Come and go. You talk about Jets fan or Leafs fans being hard on their players. Talk about Jets fans and the consensus you have on the play of Patrick Laine in 2019. Not the first part of the season where he was player of the month in November, netting 20 goals or 19 goals in a month, but since then he's still been one of those players where we're trying to wait for that, that breakout, that getting out of his nutshell kind of thing, because he hasn't done so in 2019.
Yeah, it was a really rough start for Laine. I think he went 25 games or whatever without a goal, and now he's back on another 12-game skid. But I've really seen a bit of a change in his game the last month or so. I think at the start of the year he was really struggling not only at putting the puck in the net but around it. He wasn't at 5-on-5. He really wasn't creating any offense. His defense was really starting to hurt the team, and all of a sudden, the last few games I really see him competing a lot harder. He's working the defensive zone, and I really see him. He's seeing the play a lot better. He's making some amazing passes. Him and Wheeler have played really well together, and just to develop that pass it opens a whole other thing for Laine.
Absolutely, it's more of a complete game coming from him. He still sits at the best plus minus on the team at a -17. And I'm being facetious having said that, but. Talking with Nick Ehlers earlier this week, he made a comment that when you play with that first line, you have to bring your game up that next level to can play with Wheeler and Scheifele, because you have to complement those two. You can't just be the sit and duck and be dead weight, so to speak. I agree with you. Patrick Laine has definitely increased his point totals and his assist levels in the last couple of weeks. Now him and Ehlers have gone back and forth on line 1, line 2. As far as that young group, I mean, Mark Scheifele still, if you consider him one of the young stars, he is that leader. But I think a close second, it's got to be my boy Kyle and Connor we trust. I mean, here's a guy that's gone 31 goals, 32 goals this year in the last 2 years. Talk about a kid that's going to get paid. I mean, we don't want to foreshadow too much into the summer, but when you have Connor and you've got Laine, who do you pay? Who do you bridge? How do you approach that conference room? If you were Chevy, what would you do, Anthony, in this situation?
Oh man, it's a tough situation. I mean, for Jets fans, you gotta love what's happening this year, and you can't look ahead to the summer because there's gonna be some major issues this summer trying to get everyone paid. But let's just enjoy the season for now. But when the off season comes, Patrick Laine is gonna want huge money. He's a second overall pick. He's an elite goal scorer. He's gonna ask for a lot of money. Same with Kyle Connor, and unfortunately, someone's gonna go. And if someone's willing to take the contract of Matthew Perreault or Brian Little, that's probably the way they're gonna go, because they're gonna have to shed some cap space. Perreault is probably the most likely to move, but in terms of just that $4 million contract, I think they're gonna have to move a bit more money. And Kyle Connor, he's probably gonna ask for $8+ million. Patrick Laine probably around there too, and they're move out some players to accommodate that. So this is kind of their 1 year where they have all the pieces to go all in for the. So next year we're going to see a bit of a different Jets team, I think.
Okay, so let's focus just on this year. Talk about, like, last month, literally almost a month ago, we had the trade deadline. The Jets making 5 transactions for 5 players. Kevin Hayes has the most points of all players moved at the deadline, even more than Mark Stone with Stone with the Vegas Golden Knights. How do you see Kevin Hayes fitting in with this Jets team so far?
Yeah, it's a bit of a different acquisition than Paul Stastny was last season. I think Stastny was a bit more of a flashy player. He came in, he's an elite offensive talent, and this year Kevin Hayes, he's a bit different. He's fit in really well, but he doesn't have that breakaway speed. He doesn't quite have that elite offensive talent. But he's a big body. He works the puck well. He has a good shot. He's very smart, and he's fitting really well in on Jet's second line right now.
So he's sitting on the second. The line combinations, as mentioned, Line A and Ehlers going back and forth. Kyle Connor moving up to that first line as well. The TLC line with Tanev and Kopp and Lowry has been kind of mixed up and broken up. Do you see, I mean, that's the fallback for Paul Maurice, I guess, in the playoffs when you need like a good 10 or 12 minutes played by one line. You can throw those 3 guys together. How else do you see any different combinations being tested now that the Jets have, clinched a playoff spot, or do they still have to finish strong and kind of win that Central Division to keep Nashville off on their heels?
Right now, I think they're still in a bit of a feeling out process in terms of the line combinations. Seems like Wheeler and Line were really good together when they got back together. And obviously that third line of Kopp, Lowry, and Tanev, they're an amazing line when they're together. They work as both a shutdown line for against the other team's top line, but also they can work the puck in the offensive zone. And sure, they don't score a ton of goals, but they really hem the other team in their own end with working it down low. So I'd like to see that line stay together because I think they add a whole other element to the Jets team. Not only do they have that high-end skill of Line A, Ehlers, Connor, but now they have 3 really gritty players who can shut down the opposition in Kopp, Lowry, and Tanev. And I really like them playing together because it's a whole new element for the Jets.
I mean, Andrew Kopp, talk about a season where he's had his winger traded at the deadline in Brendan Lemieux, and I was really enjoying Brendan Lemieux's play, especially in the last half when he was finally picked up and playing with the Jets. A good, hard-nosed player, similar to his dad, but more importantly, he was putting the puck in the net with Andrew Kopp being his center. And Andrew Kopp is one of those players with a high plus-minus rating, so he's doing his job in the bottom 6. Talk about one more player that got picked up. I want to hear your thoughts on Mr. Locker Room, Matt Hendricks, a gentleman who played last year with the Jets and saw the Jets playoff run, but then got traded or got released, picked up by the Wild, now back with the Jets. What do you feel his role is in these next several games, and will he get a lot of playing time, or is he more that guy, that rah-rah guy in the locker room, much like Blake Wheeler?
The first thing I thought when the Jets acquired Matt Hendricks at the trade deadline was that this is maybe a bit of a panic move from Jets management. I think we're having a bit of a rough stretch coming up to the trade deadline, and I think maybe Kevin Cheveldayoff had a chat with Paul Maurice, and they kind of said, we need to bring something into the locker room. We need to bring some sort of jump into this team, and I think that was kind of Matt Hendricks. And I think he's a great locker room guy. He's a great teammate, but I'm not seeing it on the ice right now. I think he doesn't have the foot speed anymore. He doesn't have the offensive talent, and when you're taking someone like Jack Roslovic out of the lineup for him, I think that's really it's a big detriment to your team. I think having Jack Roslovic out of the lineup for Matt Hendricks. Now, I think he's a good guy to have around in the locker room, but I don't think he's going to have a role with the team on the ice for the rest of the year. Okay,
so you see him more as that role player, that the back office kind of worker kind of guy. And I agree with you. I mean, Jack Roslovic has the speed. He has the upside. The defensive side of things, maybe not so much, but the foot speed, like you mentioned, it's just a stockpiling that the Jets did at the trade deadline. And to go along with that line, the stockpiling, the Jets now have, you could probably say 10 to 12 defense that could play in the top 6, which is great because, I mean, we haven't had Buff and we haven't had Morrissey in the lineup. But where do you see a problem when Morrissey and Buff come back? And I mean, do you see Nathan Beaulieu taking out Morrow's spot on the top six? And I mean, obviously injuries are going to happen, which is a great thing. It's a great problem to have if you're Paul Maurice, is what I'm trying to get at.
Yeah, I was actually interested in getting your opinion on this too, because I've actually really loved Nathan Beaulieu's play since being traded from Buffalo. He was the odd man out on the Sabres for much of the year, and I can't understand why, because I think he's played excellent. He's been really good with Jacob Trouba on shutting down the opposition. I think he's moved the puck well. I think he's been an excellent fit on the Jets, and I think he's going to force the hand of Paul Maurice. I think he's going to have to stay in the lineup once Morrissey and Bufflin are back. You'd imagine Morrissey would come back with Trouba, and so then I'm not really sure where Beaulieu would fit in, but I think at this point, I think he has to stay in the lineup. He's been that good.
He has been. I mean, you look at his playtime starting off, at the beginning of March, just about 12 minutes a game, and then he's bumped and shot up to almost 19 minutes on average in the month of March. Having Morrissey, when he does come back, I think it offers that bit of that play where Morrissey last year was playing a lot with Bufflin, and he was also playing with Trouba. And you've got a great combination, and I wouldn't miss up the chemistry between Kulikov and Myers, kind of leave those two aside. But you've got, Beaulieu playing with Trouba, Morrissey playing with Buff. Beaulieu can probably play with Bufflin in that same way, because Morrissey and Beaulieu play that similar type of game. And if you look at what Jacob Trouba's done on the stat sheet, he's been healthy, number one. His plus-minus has been great. He's putting the points on the board. And you see the confidence between both him and Tyler Myers on the blue line, moving the play up, knowing that they have kind of like that security with their second defense partner. And Kulikov's a stay-at-home guy. Beaulieu, it makes very little mistakes. It's great to see Sami Niku getting the confidence again, but also getting that opportunity to play in the bigs. You just see him making a little bit more of those costly mistakes in his own end. I call it the 4-foot rule, right? And you probably are aware of what's going on. You have 4 feet inside the blue, 4 feet outside the blue, and you got to get the puck out of the blue line. And I don't see Niku along with Ehlers or Laine doing the same thing. They just have that issue of not getting the puck out when needed. And I think when it comes to that playoff time, if you kept that as a stat, you'd probably see how many times they had an opportunity to get the puck out of the zone and they don't. And Laine is probably number one in the entire league, because I don't think he's one of those guys that can do it. But Sami Niku is probably the weak link on that defensive side. So I don't see him getting a lot of playoff time. But come injuries and the opportunity for more offense coming from the back end, he would probably get more playing than Morrow. Only because I think he's got more of that late season seasoning. And he's able to do more with the puck on an offensive side compared to Morrow. But I like what the Jets did I was kind of worried, and I was like, why are they stockpiling? And then I realized, well, last playoffs, they went through 11 deep. And you saw how important it is to have a strong back end. Now, Connor Hellebuyck wasn't having the greatest of seasons. I mean, he's played quite better in the last 2 games, 2 shutouts. His first 2 shutouts of the entire season. He was the last starting goalie to get a shutout, which was one of the interesting signs of how much better the team is playing, but again, sort of that bend-don't-break defense. I mean, the Jets 45-26-4, 5-0 versus the Preds on the last game. They take on the Stars tonight. Do you see Connor Hellebuyck getting the start on Dallas at home, or do you see Comrie getting the start for the Jets against the Stars tonight?
It's got to be Hellebuyck. I'm not sure you can have Comrie playing a game right now in this tight race against Nashville. He's been a lot better in the last 4 games. He's only allowed 3 goals, but the 10 before that, he let in 33, so that's about 3.3 per game. So he's had an up and down season. He's had rough stretches. It seems like he's letting in a lot more weak goals than last year, and he doesn't like last year. He was almost cocky the amount of confidence he had in the net, and you want that from a goalie. This year, he looks a little more frustrated at times, but. I think now that he's rolling, I think they got to keep it up and try to get him rolling right into the playoffs.
I agree. I think it's something where you play the hot hand here, having only 7 games left in this season. I agree. I mean, do we know what happened with Laurent Brossoit and why Comrie was put up on an emergency basis? It looked like a LBI as opposed to a UBI. You only have to call it one of the two. Do they have a time frame of when he possibly could be back? Any news from that?
Just the Palmery said that it's going to be day to day. It's not something that they expect Brossoit to be back or to be gone for long. I'd expect he's going to be back in a week or two, but they don't want to rush it. They know Comrie's going to be fine to sit on the bench behind Hellebuck. And yeah, I didn't quite get the clarification exactly what the injury was, but he seemed to be laboring through that game against Vegas a bit, and then all of a sudden Hellebuck came in. We weren't quite sure at first whether it was because of an injury or because of his rough play against Vegas, but it turned out it was an injury. So it doesn't seem like it's anything that's going to keep him out that long term.
Okay, so Anthony Jacob joining me this morning from NHL.Discussion, hashtag NHL.Discussion on Instagram. Anthony, we're going to finish off here with a little bit of the standings, East versus West, only because some Eastern teams have a lot more points than the Western teams. Let's talk about the wild card battles for both. On the East side, it's basically a 3-team race between Carolina, Montreal, and Columbus. Now, Carolina beat Montreal last night 2-1. Montreal was going into the third period with a 1-0 lead, just couldn't come out with the W. And Columbus only sits a couple points back on Montreal. Now, those are the only 3 teams I see as possibly still playing for a playoff spot. Do you include Philadelphia in that, or are they too far out?
No, for me, Philadelphia is out of it at this point. Right now, they're 8 points back with just 6 games to go. And if you look at the percentages, if they won all 6 of those games remaining, they're still at under a 30% chance of making the playoffs at that point, even if they go undefeated at this point. So I think Philadelphia is out of it at this point. The other 3 teams, that's a real interesting race. You look at Carolina. They made some real questionable trades last summer, trading Jeff Skinner, trading Elias Lindholm, 2 really good goal scorers. But all of a sudden this year they're kind of back in it. Their defense is outstanding. Jacob Slavin, I think if he played on a bigger market team, I think he's in the Norris conversation. He's that good.
Wow.
The storm surge thing. Finally, Carolina they have fans that are interested in going to the games. I mean, even when they won the Stanley Cup, they still weren't. The fans still weren't 100% engaged. And just for the Carolina Hurricanes, I'm not sure Don Hewitt ever talked about them on Coach's Corner until this storm surge thing. And this is exactly what they wanted. They just wanted some national exposure. They wanted fans. Now they're selling merchandise like never before. And this has been probably the greatest season they could think of. And so I'm hoping they hold on to a playoff spot. It'll be really interesting to see how this team would do in the playoffs. And but the Blue Jackets, that's a rough situation. The one thing I think people forgot about when they traded for Duchesne is that they weren't in a playoff spot when they acquired Matt Duchesne for all those future assets, the first round pick, the prospects. And I think people forgot that it wasn't just what they're going to do in the playoffs, they still had to make it there. And this team just hasn't gelled well since the trade deadline. Panarin's looked like a ghost on the ice. He looks like someone who's already packed his bags, looking at his next team that he might leave for on July 1. Bobrovsky had a shutout last night, but he's been up and down with injury issues. And for right now, if Columbus is going to miss the playoffs, they only have 2 draft picks this year. If Columbus misses it, I think it's like they're in an awful situation. And not only that, but I think it's bad for the league because they went all in at the trade deadline. And if future teams are going to look at this and contemplate going all in, I think the league needs teams that are going to go all in. But if they look at a team like Columbus, they went all in, they're going to miss the playoffs. I don't think that's a good thing for the league. So I'd like to see them get into. But it's going to be a tough race against Carey Price and the Montreal Canadiens.
Well, you look at those 3 teams, Columbus in the last 10, Columbus 5-4-1, the same record in the last 10 for Montreal, and Carolina just 6-3-1. The race will be on for those 3. Talk about one crappy team in the East, our boys in Ottawa. Do we even want to touch that one, or do we want to leave that alone and just say, you know what, that's just meant for Oscar the Grouch, and that's that?
That's an awful situation. But then again, the last couple of weeks, they beat Toronto. I think they beat Tampa Bay too. But yeah, that's an awful situation. And not only did they trade away all their players, and now they're at the bottom of the league, but they don't own their first round pick. I think that's amazing. That's incredible. They might be giving away their first overall pick potentially to the Colorado Avalanche, and it's just an awful situation. Off the ice, they've had just as many issues as on the ice. I mean, it's been awful for the Ottawa Senators this year.
So what is the you touched on that? What is the stipulation of Colorado getting their first round draft pick this year?
Well, if they finish last, then they'll have the best odds. And right now, at the top of the draft rankings is Jack Hughes, and he's an electrifying player. I'm not sure he's a generational player, but you look at him slotting in on the Colorado Avalanche second line behind Nathan McKinnon, and all of a sudden they have a 1-2 punch as good as any. And so the chance that they get the first overall pick is 18.5% chance if Ottawa finishes last. So obviously not the greatest odds, but it's the best odds there is. And if they lose if they win the draft lottery, I mean, Ottawa fans have got to be furious, because giving up on a elite player like Jack Hughes, that's unforgivable.
It is. I mean, Jack Hughes electrifying is an understatement for that player. I think he has a lot more upside to that of a Johnny Hockey when he came out. And Johnny Hockey went in the third round. He slipped so far only because of one thing, his size. And Jack Hughes, I mean, if you had to pick one or the other, I mean, you're still going to take Hughes over Gaudreau, I think. But, I mean, like you said, if he's second line behind Colorado's Nathan McKinnon, that's lethal. And I think a lot of the NHL has recognized what Johnny Hockey has done in the last 2 or 3 years with Calgary. They're only going to see the same, if not better, from Hughes. Now, the other thing is, let's go to the Western Conference, where the Jets sit first in the Central, and speaking of the Calgary Flames, they sit first in the Pacific. Both teams have clinched playoffs. If you look at the bottom six fighting for that wild card, it's basically a 7 through 11 logjam. Dallas, who plays the Jets tonight, they're sitting in that wild card one. Colorado right behind them with 81 points. And then you've got Minnesota, Arizona, Chicago. Chicago sitting with 76. Are they too far out? I mean, we looked at Philly, and Arizona sitting at 79 with Minnesota just 2 points out. Do you see any movement in those last 5 teams? And who do you think gets in on the wild card spots there?
Yeah, that's been an interesting race all season. Chicago, they were awful to start the season. All of a sudden, they turn it on. I think they're kind of out of it at this point. 5 points back with just 7 games left. I mean, you never know with Chicago. They've got Kane and Taves. They've got all the talent in the world. I think they're a little too far back. In terms of Arizona, what a run. I mean, they've had so many injuries, but somehow Rick Tocchet's done an incredible job, the head coach in Arizona, to get them into a playoff race. All of a sudden now they've lost 5 in a row. That's tough for Arizona. After losing 5 in a row, I'm not sure they get back ahead of Colorado. Minnesota, they're almost sellers at the trade deadline, but Bruce Boudreau did guarantee they're going to make the playoffs. You never know about them. Colorado, they've been hot lately. McKinnon, Rantanen, they're firing at all cylinders. So probably at this point, Dallas is another point up on them. I think Dallas is going to make it. I think Colorado is going to make it, and I think the Wild and Coyotes are going to be on the outside in just as they are now.
You think Colorado can do it even though they lost Landeskog for the season? I mean, that's the thing. They talked about that being a huge miss for the Avalanche. And Chicago's, I think, too far out. I think they just have not enough games to really catch up. So I do agree with you on them. They had a really terrible beginning of the season. Any predictions on who you'd like to see in the finals? I mean, we can talk more about this in the next couple of weeks, but right now, do you see your Leafs playing the Jets in the finals, or not enough ammo for either one?
I don't know. It would be a pretty tough road for both of them to make it. The Jets, they're going to have to go through Nashville again. They're going to have to go through Vegas again. I mean, Vegas is on fire. They've won, they're 10-1-0 in their last 11 games since getting Mark Stone. Like, they've been unbelievable. Nashville a bit more up and down, but the Jets to get to the finals, that's going to be a tough road. Leafs even tougher. I mean, going up against Boston again, their arch rival, and then Tampa Bay in the second round. I'm not sure either of those teams are going to make it. I think probably, if anything, the Jets have a bit of a better chance, but I'm not sure this is the Leafs' year. In terms of a team that's going to make it to the finals, how are we going to say that it's not going to be Tampa Bay? I mean, look at what they're doing. They win 5 of their last 6 games, and they're the greatest team of all time. Their record's 62 wins. They're at 58 right now. So it was the 1995-96 Red Wings, I believe, that have that record, and they've been outstanding. I mean, Nikita Kucherov, 120 points. He only needs one more, and he has more points than Sidney Crosby's ever had in one season. And I think that's outstanding. I mean, Tampa Bay is a deep team. They have deep defense. They've got so much depth. Their team's not even fair. So you never know with Tampa Bay. It'll be tough for any team to beat them. In the West, I think you got to have Vegas right now. They're the 3rd seed in the Pacific Division right now, but they're on fire. Mark Stone on that team, he's been outstanding. And it's probably going to be Vegas-Winnipeg in the Western Conference Final again. We'll see who's the hot team, who's the hot goalie. Fleury stole the show last year, but if Connor Hellebuyck gets hot, the rest of the Jets team kind of rises to the occasion. You never know.
All right, so I'm going to leave you on this last question, Anthony. If you had to pick 3 qualities of a team, depth, talent, and injuries, how would you grade them going into a playoff run? What's the most important?
Well, I mean, you got to have talent first. If you don't have the talent, you're not even going to be able to compete with any other team. I mean, the non-talented teams, they're not going to be in the playoff race. They're not going to be a team that's even going to be able to compete. And between depth and injuries, they kind of go hand in hand. Like if you don't have injuries, you don't really need that depth. But as soon as you get those injuries, that depth is really that's really tested. I guess you'd have to say injuries is next important. I mean, you look at if your team's going to get some costly injuries, that's really rough going into the playoffs. Nashville a few years ago, they made the finals, but Ryan Johansson gets injured in the 3rd round. He's not with them in the finals, and all of a sudden their depth gets a little exposed. So I mean, both are super important in a playoff run. You can't have any injuries, and I mean the Jets loaded up on their depth. So right now, hopefully they get Morrissey and Bufflin back from injury, but they've got that depth just in case as well. So all very important things going into playoff run.
They should be getting those players back before the regular season ends. Anthony, let's do this again real soon. How about that?
Yeah, it was great. Lots of fun. Good chatting with you.
So tell us real quick, where do we find you on Instagram?
Yeah, at NHL.Discussion. You'll find it pretty easily. And we just post news, highlights, rumors, analysis, anything. Lots of, for the draft, for the trade deadline, we have full coverage of everything, World Juniors, playoffs, everything. We'll have everything for every hockey fan.
So we'll do this again right before the playoffs start. Anthony, Jacob, NHL Discussions, thanks for joining us. This has been Heavy Lifting with Theo the Juggernaut, our inaugural show. Tell me what you think. Leave me a like. Thanks for listening. We'll talk to you soon. Take care.